in reintroductions, we need to decide how we're going to release the animals. And some of this has to do with, I was mentioned, acclimation. How do we make sure the individuals are acclimated to their environment to make sure they're going to be as successful as possible? So there are two types of releases. One is called a hard release. And this is basically you take an animal in a cage and you let it go. You don't do anything. This is not acclimating the individual to their new habitat. A soft release is when you actually do this acclimation process. And a lot of times with a soft release, that means that the individuals that are being reintroduced are usually kept in some sort of enclosure or larger cage, not like a carrier, like a larger space that's enclosed at the site of the new habitat so that they can kind of see what it looks like, but they maybe don't have to find their own food, or maybe they're just protected from predators. Another way to do a soft release might be to go ahead and release them, but continue to provide food at the site where you release them so that they can get a little bit of practice finding their own food and that sort of thing. We also need to know if the animals have the skills to survive. So some animals have instincts that tell them what to do so that they can survive and find food and reproduce and protect themselves from predators, all those things. Some animals need to learn a lot of things. So we want to make sure that the animals reduce their associations with people. We don't want wildlife to see people as a source of food or to approach people. Especially for things like predators, that means there's a saying they often say at national parks that have bears, a fed bear is a dead bear. Because if you feed the bears, they will associate people with food and they will approach people. And some of these animals could have severe conflict problems, and bears are one of those. Wolves would do the same thing. So if you're captive rearing these individuals, you don't want them to see people as part of their family or as someone that's going to bring them food. We want to make sure that individuals can find food. We want to make sure they can raise their own young. If they're a social animal, do they know how to act in their social group? And will they be accepted into a social group? And it gets even more complicated if the species is migratory. So will the individuals migrate to the right places at the right times? So depending on the species, this could be really complicated. So you could imagine that things like primates might be really difficult because primates are extremely social. They learn a lot. They know a lot of things about which trees have what kind of fruit, what times of year those fruits are available, and they interact with a lot of other species. And so teaching them all of that is very complicated. And migration is also very complicated if it's a long migration. A lot of early reintroductions failed by not taking these things into consideration. And so a lot of money was spent early on in conservation biology trying to do reintroductions, but taking the hard release approach and not thinking about skills that animals need. So I just release the animal out and hope for the best. It's not the most effective method. Successive reintroductions is still limited, and sometimes captive reared individuals just don't do as well as wild-born individuals. So I know I give lots of amphibian examples, but that's just because it's what I know the most about. But there is a threatened species of toad, the boreal toad, that lives up in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And they have found that the captive reared individuals have lower reproductive success and lower survival than the individuals that were born or hatched out of eggs in those wild ponds. They don't really know why, but they do know that the captive reared individuals aren't as productive towards contributing to the next generation's recruitment as an individual that started its life in its native habitat. So people go to great lengths to try to help endangered species survive and to do as well as possible in these reintroductions. So this is an example. The California condors are endangered. This is a puppet right here. So this is a puppet somebody made to look like a California condor adult to feed the chicks in captivity. They don't want these condors, which are huge birds, to associate people with food. So they've done this by making sure they don't see people or don't associate people with food at all. So they use these puppets. This is another example, whooping cranes. This is happening right in Louisiana, in southern Louisiana. We have an experimental whooping crane population. And I don't know that this is pictures from Louisiana, but they wanted to reduce imprinting on people. And so, similar to the condors, they created this outfit. They totally cover people up so they can't see real people. And then they have this kind of hand puppet that's supposed to look like an adult whooping crane that feeds and interacts directly with the chicks. And so they never receive food from a human hand. They receive it from this puppet. Whooping cranes are also famous because we've gone to great lengths to try to get them to migrate. So this is a lightweight plane, and somebody actually flew and stopped every so often to teach captive reared whooping cranes where to go so that they could migrate. And there is a movie, I think it's really old, but it shows kind of the process at which somebody went to great lengths to teach these whooping cranes how to migrate. And this shows the migration. So we have a population down here in Louisiana. The one where they showed them how to migrate is this migration route here, from Wisconsin all the way down to Florida, which is a really long way. But there are some very dedicated people that worked on this. And so you can see Louisiana is part of this non-essential experimental population area. And so we have captive reared whooping cranes down here. I don't believe they teach them to migrate from Louisiana, but they have done this in the past for this population going Wisconsin to Florida.